So let's have a little walk through here. We're starting off with Unit 1. And so if you have that open in the keyword page, and we're just looking at people in business here, which is the first topic. So the first thing to remind you of there and to point out is from this topic, Anna, this will be recorded. Yeah, this will be recorded. So there's two things from this first topic that I think are important, or you can get caught out, like two questions that you should always start with the definition, right? So any question about relationships in business, you need to always start with the definition of either cooperative or competitive. Now, that might seem to you like you might think, well, I'm always going to do that. But like, I actually wouldn't always say, oh, you have to start with the definition of the question. But what happens is with questions in relationship and business, like there was a question a few years ago and it said like, illustrate how a cooperative relationship could exist between Aldi and its suppliers or something like that. And what happens is a lot of students will just jump into really answering that by just focusing on the example. But like a good chunk of the marks are going for the definition. And parts 1 and part 2 of that question were similar, just one was competitive relationship, one was cooperative. So just be tight on those definitions, and any question on those always start with the definition. And just know there was a change, like previously in explaining cooperative, for example, you would have gotten away with just saying it's a win-win relationship. But in recent times, they've looked for a little bit more, so you'd have to say it's a scenario of mutual benefit. And then with competitive, previously you would have gotten away with saying win-lose, but now you have to say they're pursuing mutually exclusive goals. I think it's good to have examples prepared on the two types of relationships that could exist between the various stakeholders. Just a little trick that can be good if you're dealing with a long question and you're explaining, let's say, and you would only do this for a long question, you're explaining cooperative relationships. You like to come back, the Aldi and its suppliers one, you might give an example and then at the end you'd say Aldi wins because, supplier wins because. So you're just hammering home that you understand that it's a win-win relationship. But to come back to my original point there, I was saying there's two definitions here, two places here where I always start with the definitions. So relationships is one, and then any question on interest groups, I'd always be starting with the definition as well. So like there was a question a few years ago, again, it said like illustrate the role of interest groups in business or something like that. And it was like a 15 marker. And like what loads of students got caught up in there is like, you know, trying to go into loads of detail about what like the Irish Farmers Association do or what like IBEC do. And like that can't be expected of students, and it's not expected. So actually of those 15 marks, 6 marks were for the definition. So any question on either interest groups or relationships, let's start with the definition, right? And then just an important thing there, if you are explaining the role of an interest group, the way the marking scheme works is you need to say who they represent, but then you also need to state what their kind of methodology of representing whoever it is. So to give you an example, right, let's say you're talking about IBEC. So you would say they represent Irish employers, so it's the Irish Employers Confederation there. And then you would say for the methodology, they lobbied, if you look here, right, it says they lobbied the Irish government to ease restrictions during COVID. But just an important little trick here is that you want to repeat the language from the definition. So see the way we're saying here in the definition, negotiation, lobbying and boycotting, they're kind of what an interest group do. So when you're explaining an interest group, try and drop that language in to whichever one you're explaining. So if you look here with the ICTU, we said they negotiate, and we've used negotiate up here. So just try and use the same language because this mark's going for identifying the methodology there. So it's definitions, relationships, interest groups, always start with them. 2 points on relationships there, and with interest groups, drop in the language from the definition and whatever one you're talking about. Elements of a valid contract, I think there's much to say there. Obviously no wiggle room whatsoever in like for this stuff in particular in terms of expressing things in your own words. You've got to be pretty tight on it. I did said loads of times before that Unit 1, look, remember we don't always need to give examples. Certainly if the question asks for an example or the verb is illustrate, we need to give examples, but it tends to be the case that with Unit 1 they do ask for examples a lot of the time. So I was saying, yeah, Unit 1, so sorry, they do tend to ask for examples. Sorry, James, I just see your question there. So I put up a new post, so it's not yesterday's post, James. I just pinned an old post to the top of the newsfeed, so hopefully you will see that. Maybe you'll let me know. So I just put up an old post at the top of the newsfeed and I pinned it, so it's not the one that was there yesterday. Methods for terminating a legal contract. What you'll see here is if you just think, when you're thinking methods for terminating a contract, really good thing to have in your head is the words contractual obligation. So if you look how often that crops up here, so just think contractual obligation. Because you're going to mention that with both performance, so it's where both parties fulfill their contractual obligation, and then you can also use it down here, breach, one side doesn't fulfill their contractual obligation. So that's a good term. You can use it in two different places there. Condition versus warranty. Look, I've made, no secret of my opinion that you should be all over every single aspect of Unit 1. It seems likely you'll get the extra question in Unit 1, or we certainly hope so. There's no guarantee. Obviously, both mocks had Unit 1 as that question 4. But what's happened in recent years is, because the extra long question has been on Unit 1 and every student in the country is preparing Unit 1 well, what the examiner has kind of done to legislate for that is they've gone into the deepest, darkest depths to pull out some obscure questions. Like last year we did a short question on joint labour committees from the Labour Court. So you've got to be all over Unit 1, so that, knowing the difference between condition and warranty, knowing about an invitation to treat, that type of thing, it's just every single aspect of it, you need to be tight on it, right? Remedies for breach, nothing jumping out at me there. Okay, so moving on to the next one then. So consumer conflict, big thing here is the sale of goods. So I do have this is up there in the predicted videos. Look, sale of goods is just a staple of the Leaving Cert. It's roughly 50% of papers, if not a little bit more. And I think one particular area of sale of goods to be very focused on this year is redress, which I'll come to in a second. But just remember, with sale of goods, so let's say you get a general question about sale of goods and supply services, and it's something like outline the provisions of the Sale of Goods and Supply Services Act. So it's a very broad question. It's giving you a lot of freedom to talk about whatever parts of the Act that you want. Just remember, you're not getting away with giving these as 3 separate points. So let's say that that's a 20-mark question and you think, I need to give 4 points here because we're using our rule of 5, so 5 into 20 goes 4 times. You're not going to get away with 3 separate points. Goods should be of merchantable quality, goods should be fit for purpose, goods should be as described. They're only going to count as one provision, which is about goods. So I'd be very wary. Like, there has been cases in the past where you could have given these as 3 separate points, but that was in cases where you were given kind of a spiel about a good in particular. So I'd just be very careful if you're given a little story, so one of those boxes or a mini spiel or ABQ style thing, and it's about a good. Well, then you might get away with it, but I'd still be wary of doing it. But if it's a broader question, I would just give 1 point about goods and include these, and then move on to the wider provisions of the Act, because there's loads of other stuff that you can mention there. On the redress then, so the important thing to remember with redress, right? If you're explaining redress, the examiner doesn't want you to explain what a refund, a repair and a replacement are. That's not really the idea. The idea is that you want to show the examiner that you understand how the course of redress you're entitled to depends on how quickly you complain and how serious the fault are. So your rights diminish over time, right? And that's kind of what the examiner wants to see. Like if I said to you, if you bought something that wasn't of merchantable quality, you bring it back to the shop, right? And you're like, if I said, which one of these 3 guys do you want? Do you want your money back? Do you want the shop to repair whatever you bought? Or do you want a replacement? Well, refund sounds pretty good. You get your money back. Replacement sounds pretty good. You get the same model or similar. But repair, I'd be like, well, I'd way prefer the other 2 because you've just repaired for me. I'm like, well, why was it broken in the first place? How do I know it's not going to break down again? So there is kind of a hierarchy here. So that's kind of what you're showing, that your rights, the element of redress that you're entitled to, is dependent on how serious the fault is, how prompt you complain. If there's a delay, or if it's of minor nature, you can see you might only get a partial refund, or like I said, repair, which is definitely the least desirable. Moving on, Consumer Protection Act questions, broad questions about the Consumer Protection Act. So when I say a broad question, I mean a question that says something like, outline the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act. Sorry, James, what I'll do is, if you scroll down through the newsfeed, actually, James, you might have to keep going, right? So I did pin it. If you scroll down through the newsfeed, James, and keep going till a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I put up a post that had like keyword grids or keyword notes for each unit. So that's the one you're looking for. So it looks like that, James. So that's the post you're looking for, right? Just to let you know. So that is the one that you're looking for. I thought it was pinned at the top. Yeah, it is still at the top there, I think. So that's the one that you're looking for anyway. If it's not at the top, you can scroll down and get it, James. So that's the one that we're using anyway. Just so on the Consumer Protection Act. So yeah, broad questions on Consumer Protection Act are rare enough. But we did have one for the first time in about 20 years, maybe 3 years ago. Now, the thing about the Consumer Protection Act, I know the students hate the Consumer Protection Act because it's just so waffly. So the important thing here, okay, thanks Katie Deadly. The important thing here with the Consumer Protection Act, to stop yourself from getting into avoiding the whole waffly nature of it, it's a trap. Because it is by nature, it just reads like, oh, this is absolute waffle. So what I would always advise with the Consumer Protection Act is focus on the concrete things. So if you look at the Consumer Protection Act here, right, and one of the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act is about false claims. So basically it's illegal for business to make false claims about a product. But actually, you know what, false claims, it kind of has a very formal definition. So a false claim is one that impairs the average consumer's ability to make an informed choice. So it's a really nice definition. You can easily pick up marks, so you need to be pretty tight on that. When you talk about pricing, you can mention that the Minister for Trade and Enterprise has the power to dictate the prices be displayed in a particular manner. Like, that's a very concrete thing that you can say about it. As far as enforcement goes, you can say it gives the CCPC statutory powers. That's a very concrete thing that you can say about it. So try and pull out the really kind of concrete things. Also with aggressive selling, you can mention what constitutes aggressive selling. So use that language: harassment, coercion, or exercising undue influence. CCPC cropped up did come up last year. But like I said, I wouldn't cut a corner on that just because it came up last year. Unit 1's too important. Don't cut any corners. Just, you want to be pretty accurate on the CCPC. So when you're saying like they conduct research, for example, you want to say into what? So it's into consumer behavior, and the reason it's done is to assist consumers in changing habits and saving money, right? They advise the government, but what do they advise them on? They advise them on where legislation, consumer protection legislation, is a bit weak. So they recommend new laws that will give extra protection to the consumer. So just be very focused and accurate in your answers to that. Small claims is one to be careful of. Real weird marking scheme on that previously, right? So small claims, I think the last time that appeared, it appeared as an evaluate question, right? And it was like, I think it was like a 15 marker. It's like a 15 marker, and I think maybe of those 15 marks, 12 marks or something were for the actual explaining the roles, or kind of explaining the small claims procedure. But what happened that year is a lot of students under-answered it. They were a point short. So just note that with small claims, give an extra point, because, and the reason for that is that the points are kind of short. To always give an extra point than you think you need to with small claims. It's because, like, if you're given a heading that says, okay, you're explaining the small claims procedure and saying, oh, it's inexpensive, application fee is 25 quid. Not really much more to add there, you've made your point. So it's because the points are kind of short and sweet that the last time that popped up, they looked for an additional point and actually caught loads of students out, and they ended up bleeding away 3 marks in that question. So just be careful of that. Ombudsman, yeah, again, I would just note that, yeah, I've just nothing really to say on that, but I would just be familiar with all aspects of Unit 1. Industrial relations. Factors leading to industrial relations disputes. Just one thing here, if you're talking about pay, this is just to show you a really good example off the top of my head of like using keywords, right? And if you watched anything that I've ever said, you'll know that I really want you to understand the importance of like using the language of the course. So like just taking the words that you've encountered throughout your study and putting them somewhere into your answer, right? So this is a really good example. Like if I pulled someone off the street, right, and I said to them, here, what's something that could lead to an industrial relations dispute? What could cause a disagreement between employers and employees? Like anybody, like with a slight sort of degree of common sense would be able to say, well, say I could see a situation where workers want more money, but the people they work for don't want to give them more money, and there's a dispute over that. But like you're studying discourse, so you've got to show that you're different from that person on the street, that you've got a different degree of knowledge. So what you want to say to make yourself different is you want to say, well, an employee could launch a pay claim, and if the employer rejects that claim, so when you say a pay claim, you say such as a cost of living claim or a relativity claim. So that's language from the course. So, because you should know about the different types of pay claims. So that way you showed, oh look, I've studied pay claims. I'm not that person that's on the street there. I know a little bit more. I've got some different language. So that's why there's this whole emphasis on keywords, because a lot of what happens throughout business, it is quite intuitive. It's easy to understand. You can get very, common sense will help, but you've got to show that you're different, that you've studied this course, right? So, and it's like I suppose a general rule to guide you. If any time you're writing an answer that someone on the street could answer, or that someone who hasn't studied this can answer, you're probably not in a good position with that question, right? So just know that's a good example. You want to say, oh, well, employee can launch pay claims such as a cost of living claim or a relativity claim. If an employer rejects that claim, well, then there could be a dispute, right? Types of pay claims below that, doesn't really pop up as a long question, has popped up as a short question to match them recently, but yeah, I just know them. Types of industrial action did pop up last year. I'll just say this, you see this stuff on official strike. This stuff about kind of the process for a strike to be made official is savage knowledge to have, right? And I'll tell you why. So this stuff about like, if a strike's going to be official, well then there has to be a secret ballot, 1 week's notice has to be given, and 1 week's notice has to be given. So there has to be a majority, secret ballot has to be a majority, so 51% in favour, and has to be one week's notice given. I say that's savage knowledge because there is 3 separate exam questions that you can use that for. So if you're asked about types of industrial action and you're explaining an official strike, you can drop that stuff in about secret ballot, 1 week's notice, and there has to be a majority. If you are asked a question specifically about the process for a strike to be official, you're obviously going to give that as your answer. Or if you're asked a question about the Industrial Relations Act, you can also mention that it outlines the process for a strike to be official, and you can drop that in again. So you can use that for 3 separate exam questions. So it's really good knowledge to have in your head, right? So sorry, there it is there. Yeah, I've laid it out there. Sorry, for a strike to be official, you gotta have a secret ballot. 1 week's notice has to be given, so it's all there. But that is, look, put an asterisk beside that. It's great knowledge. It's going to cover you for 3 separate exam questions. Just coming down there to Industrial Relations Act. Some great questions in there. I'll come to questions in a while. There's some crackers in there, so just keep firing them in, right? The Industrial Relations Act, again, is a savage thing to know inside out, right? And I'll tell you why. So I would just know it so well because, first of all, this definition of a trade dispute, you could get asked to define a trade dispute. It came up in last year's paper. It came up for 8 marks. Like, that's a huge chunk of marks. So you can get asked about this definition in its own right, or you can use it if you're asked about the Industrial Relations Act, you give that definition because it formally defines what a trade dispute is. If another example here, the process for official strike, I've already mentioned, you can use that for a question on the Industrial Relations Act, but you can also use it for 2 other exam questions if you're explaining what an official strike is in terms of like what are the options available, if there's for industrial action, or you can also use it if you're asked explicitly about the steps that have to be taken. Sorry, the other thing to mention, yeah, so same thing with these, with primary and secondary picketing. You can be asked a short question to distinguish between those 2 things. So good definitions to know, or you can drop in the definitions if you're asked about the Industrial Relations Act. So these 3 parts of the Industrial Relations Act are really useful because they're going to cover you not just for the Industrial Relations Act, but for some other questions as well. That's my point, right? So definitions of primary and secondary, really useful. Trade dispute definition, really useful. And then that stuff for strikes, covering you for 3 exam questions, really useful. One thing to take note of for the WRC, right? WRC has been like fairly popular one in recent years, but there was a question on one of the mocks, and the question said something like, outline the role of WRC in cases of discrimination. And you just need to be careful with that one, because these are really the 2 roles that apply in the case of discrimination. Like, you can't say that they provide an advisory service, because that's in the case, that's kind of in a non-dispute situation. But if there's a discrimination case, there is a dispute there. So you're kind of, that question about like what's their role in the discrimination case, you've kind of got less answers that you can draw on. So it's really mediation and adjudication. So just take note, two different questions. So you can get asked a broad question about outlining the sort of role of the WRC, but like if it's what's their role in a discrimination case or a disagreement, you're a little bit more limited in your answers, right? Labour Court hasn't come up since 2008, but like I have it up there in the predictions videos because like to my mind, there's no real reason for that. Like it still has a valid role in industrial relations in Ireland. So I'd still know that very well. And like I say, the whole thing of joint labour committees there, that did come up last year. So maybe it's on the examiner's radar. Like that was an extremely awkward short question to just ask about joint labour committees as a short question. Not very popular. Again, really important one from this Unfair Dismissals Act. So you can be asked, first of all, like you could see a short question where you have to distinguish between fair dismissal and constructive dismissal. So with fair dismissal, just remember, there's not really, if it's a short question and you need to give, and for any short question, remember your golden rule is you need to be given, if you're explaining a term in a short question, even if it's just a part of a short question, you should always be looking to give 2 sentences of keyword information about that thing. So like there's examples of short questions where you have to explain something and it's only 3 of the 10 marks, but even though it's 3 marks, it's still broken down 2 and 1. So you still have to give 2 bits of keyword info. So if you're explaining fair dismissal in a short question, not really a whole lot you can do in the answer space other than to say the grounds for fair dismissal. So name them: incapability, incompetence, misrepresentation or misconduct. And then the only other thing you can really say is that it applies to the Unfair Dismissals Act and give the year, yeah. And then with constructive dismissal, okay, that's maybe a little bit more straightforward. Just one thing to be careful of, a lot of students mix this up. If you do see a question on the grounds for fair dismissal, make sure that you do not, this is a massive trap, don't mix these 2 guys up. Incapability and incompetence, number 1 and 2 there, don't mix them up. So incapability is not that you're incapable of doing your job. Incapability is that you're incapable of presenting yourself in your place of work. So it's that you're persistently late, persistently absent, and your employer should be able to prove this person is always late. So they have to have clocking in records or whatever it is. Incompetence then is the one that you're actually not able to do your job. You're not going to say that though, you're just going to say you're not meeting expected standards, but really importantly that a reasonable time frame for improvement has to be given, right? One that I just think looks overdue, it is up in the prediction videos, is this one here, the redress for unfair dismissal. The marking scheme in this is a little bit weird. So like if you came up a few years ago and question was like something, you know, pretty straightforward, outline the redress for unfair dismissal. And usually in that type of question, right, you'll sit there and you'll come up with the heading. So you'll come up with reinstatement and you'll get marks for that. And then usually there's only, so let's say that's 2 marks, and then there's 3 marks for an explanation. So let's say reinstatement means the employer is given their job back, they're given their job back, or they're treated like they were never dismissed in the first place. So you kind of explained it in 1 sentence of information there. A lot of the time, actually, that would be grand. But the marking scheme for this question was actually they wanted state, explain, explain. Like usually the explain, explain applies to when you're given a term in a question. Like it'd be different if a question said to you, explain reinstatement. Well, then you're never getting away with just saying, oh, you're treated like you were never dismissed. You should always be looking to tag on something else. So I'm making quite a subtle point here that I hope you understand, but just know with this, give enough information. So with redress for unfair dismissal, state the heading and then give 2 sentences of explanation with all of these, because it just caught out at some really good students that maybe we had a mock 3 years ago and I can just remember it being chaos. So just be careful with these, the heading and then 2 sentences, 2 good sentences of keyword information. It was a little bit weird, they're looking for a little bit more information. Okay, I'll take some questions. So Jake, theoretically on the Consumer Rights Act, theoretically you could be. Now, most of the Consumer Rights Act, right? So for the most part, what's in the old sale of goods has been transferred over to now falls on the Consumer Rights Act. So I would say, I would be surprised if you got a question on the Consumer Rights Act that you couldn't use sale of goods on. There is some other information, like the big thing about Consumer Rights Act is kind of around digital content and digital services and consumer rights around that. I think that'd be a particularly harsh question if they were to put that in. I did send someone a list of that the other day, so what I'll do is I'll just pin that stuff in the newsfeed so you can look at it. But like theoretically, you could be asked about it. Would we get away with just knowing the Sale of Goods, Supply Services Act or Consumer Protection, or do we need to know all of them? I wouldn't cut any corners with Unit 1. I wouldn't cut any corners at all. Because what could happen with the Sale of Goods, for example, is they could ask you to explain certain provisions and they could just give them to you in the question. Same with the Consumer Protection Act. In fact, that one I said with Consumer Protection doesn't often come up as a long question, but that one that did come up maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they did feed you. They basically said, what's the Consumer Protection Act say about misleading practices, that type of thing. So I wouldn't cut any corners there. What unit is data protection is an amazing question. I'm delighted you asked that. It's something that I was going to touch on later. So GDPR can be asked. It's something that's really useful to know because GDPR can come up as a Unit 1 question or a Unit 3 question. It can come up as Unit 1 because it affects the consumer, right? And sort of consumer legislation in a way coming from the EU. But it can come up as Unit 3 because it's sort of around communication and how businesses manage our data and our information. So it has in the past appeared as both. It has come up as question 1 and question 5 in the past. So a really good question. So it is a good one to know for that reason because you can use it in 2 places. And like I say, just on the Unit 1 thing, I was saying like, oh, you don't want to get, they've gone for some obscure Unit 1 questions. That's a weird way you can get caught out. Is that like, you know, you think you know Unit 1 really well and then, oh, I didn't realize that they could ask about GDPR here. So if you're planning on really being all over Unit 1 as part of your kind of study strategy, yes, you should be factoring GDPR into that. So it's a really good question. Is the trade union definition important? Yeah. Like I say, I'd just be very solid in Unit 1. Can we leave out the legislative methods in Chapter 3? I wouldn't leave anything out of Unit 1. I'd be very tight in the entire unit. Do you need the year along with the acts? Yeah, I'd always have the year. What's the actual difference between mediation, conciliation and adjudication? We're not getting into that here. The whole, when we did that in the grind week, I went into the detail on it for the WRC. I know it's confusing. I might just do a separate video and put it up because I have gotten that question, but I did cover it in detail in one of the early grind weeks. The difference between them is in terms of the WRC's role in facilitating the kind of solution. That's what the big difference is. Are there steps of the small claims procedure important? Look, I would just say with the small claims, yeah, I would be prepared for a question on small claims. Like I say, I just wouldn't be cutting any corners in Unit 1. Just one thing with small claims is I'd make sure I have a heading and an explanation of that heading. So saying inexpensive, it costs 25 quid, etc. But like I say, with small claims, just give an extra point. If you have a sentence with 2 key terms, is it better to break it into 2 sentences or leave it as 1? Jake, really good question. Happy you asked that. I'm a big fan, really big fan of using short sentences in business. Really big fan. I think it makes it easier for the examiner, where the examiner has to award marks in 2 banks. I think it makes it easier for them to do that if you give them 2 clear sentences. So I would always be a fan. I think the best students actually do that. So I think that's a great question. Is there a particular chapter in Unit 1 which we should prioritise above others? Ollie, it's all important. I wouldn't cut any corners with Unit 1. Leaving out Unit 6, but want to cover the shorts. Are there any documents and potential shorts that appear on this unit? So I'm leaving out Unit 6, but want to cover the short questions. Are there any documents on the potential short questions that could appear in this unit? Look, I'll just say this, Charlie. There is in the Easter business notes, there's a page in there that's what I call a short question map. So I haven't updated it maybe in the last 2 years, but like it basically for previous 24 years or whatever, it counts how many times different topics have appeared as a short question. So what you want to do is the first 2 columns are like U for unit and T for times. So you want to look up Unit 6 and then look at times and find the biggest number for Unit 6 questions. So like I also put a video on the news feed a while ago about that, about the most common Unit 6 short questions. So you can go and look at that. What type of long questions can I ask you about WRC? They could ask you about the role of WRC overall, or they could ask you about their role in kind of a dispute or discrimination situation. So that second question about like what's their role when there's a dispute or discrimination, that's a little bit harder. If they ask a question on the steps of small claims, do you want to give the small claims procedure definition? And that's not one I'd see. And to come to my point, I wouldn't always be like, I'll start with the definition. I wouldn't see a reason to give the definition question about small claims procedure. Probably I'd just be into, you know, the kind of the stages or steps involved. Okay. Let's get into Unit 2. So I'll just give you a sec there yourselves to open up the Unit 2 ones from the newsfeed. Okay, so looking at Unit 2 now, which is obviously a short one, just with this, so Unit 2 is basically three things in my eyes. So it's like, what are the reasons why someone will become an entrepreneur? It's skills and characteristics of an entrepreneur, and then it's entrepreneurship. Now, again, I wouldn't cut any corners here because of the ABQ, right? And all of those three things have been assessed in the past for the Unit 2 part of the ABQ. Like skills and characteristics, by far the most common. I think it's 5 of the last 7 times that Unit 2 has been on the ABQ rotation. They ask skills and characteristics, so that's mad. And that includes last year. So I do feel that like, surely they have to look somewhere else, right? Now, I still wouldn't, you know, skip past skills and characteristics, because that question 5 on the long questions, the first part of the first question, part B, that's usually a mixture of Unit 2/3. So if they use part of Unit 2 for the ABQ, they might use another part then in that question 5. They might use no part at all, but it's just one topic. So I just know it all pretty well. So just with the reasons to become an entrepreneur, right? When this cropped up as in the ABQ, I think it was 2019. What it said was, the question, it was about an entrepreneur called Emma, I think. And the question was like something like in the ABQ, and it said something like, outline the benefits for Emma of becoming an entrepreneur. And the language in that was a little bit misleading, because the question was really asking like, what are the reasons why Emma would become an entrepreneur? So like some of the things in the market scheme were like, oh, she saw a gap in the market. Like, is that a benefit? Just kind of, I wouldn't see that necessarily as a benefit. Like it's more of a reason why. Just one thing here, if you do see this as part of the ABQ Unit 2, I would say I'd probably be, again, inclined to maybe over-answer this a little bit and give an additional point, and definitely let the text guide you. Definitely let the text guide you. Like if you think the text discriminates a particular reason, just go with that. With skills and characteristics, I would always start with skills and characteristics. I would always start with these ones. So you can remember this sentence, right? You can take this down. And I'll tell you why I would always start with these ones. Really, I don't care, Amy. So R is realistic, I is innovative, D is decisive. You can put that in, sorry, really, I don't really care, Amy. The O again is risk-taking, the C is confident, and then the A is ambitious. The reason I would start with these, like let's say it comes up in the ABQ and it's about skills and characteristics, I would start with these because these are the ones that are most concrete as far as the marketing scheme goes. Like there's been times where it's come up as a long question, things like human relations, things like future focus, they haven't been on the marketing scheme. These ones are the most concrete. So I'd always, if it comes up in the ABQ, I'd be looking for them first of all. Now last year's ABQ, they accepted loads. And again, it's probably one to let the text guide you on. So like, if you think that the text is screaming that they have human relations skills, go with it by all means. But I'd always try and start with these ones because these are the ones that are on the marketing scheme. the most routinely. So I'd always start looking for these to start off with. Then with entrepreneurship, I make no secret about my belief that entrepreneurship is just something to be all over. It's something that was on, the mock companies went with it. It's the Unit 2 part of ABQ. I think it was a good thing to go with. It does look like it's just overdue. I haven't seen it since I think it was the ABQ in 2010. So being tight in the definition, knowing the benefits and the methods to promote entrepreneurship is all that you can really be focused on there. That's kind of it. That is it for Unit 2 though, really. Moving on to Unit 3. So looking at management skills. So if you want to open up the Unit 3 ones there. Any questions on that Unit 2 stuff? Niall, no, I wouldn't. I totally wouldn't. Really good question. So Niall asked, would you recommend learning all 8 skills and characteristics? I would focus on those ones that I mentioned. And even with them, I think you'd be safe enough cutting one of them out even maybe. I just think that they're the ones that are consistently there, right? Adam's a really good question. It sort of depends a little bit. See, with Unit 1, right, if you go back 2 or 3 years, it's really good for Unit 1 because they had to rotate stuff quicker on Unit 1 these days because of an extra question on it. But I would generally say, yeah, 2 to sort of, if you go back 2, 3, 4 years, that's probably the stuff, generally speaking. They're years that are amazing to practice short questions, actually. So they're generally the years I go back and practice. Now, you'll see on the platform, like we've got all those, I've put up all those kind of predicted videos. And for each of those videos, I explain why I think it's due to be asked. So I do have a spreadsheet that I keep of when things have appeared. But I think for Unit 1, if you go back 2 or 3 years, really good questions to practice there. I think that's a good thing with short questions as well. And then 2 to 5 years overall, probably. I think those papers as well, particularly around the ABQ, like the market schemes in the ABQ have changed over time. So certainly around the ABQ, more recent ones are better because they're more reflective of kind of, the market scheme at the moment. So first of all, management skills then. So management skills, looking at leading and motivating. So just know that last year we had a big chunky question on motivating as a long question. So I think we had part A and part B. And it asked about everything to do with motivation. So it asked about theory X, theory Y, and Maslow popped up as well. Now, you obviously need to be, management skills did come up in the ABQ last year, but you need to be tight in the definitions of the 3 of them, so leading, motivating, communicating. If you get a broad question about management skills in the ABQ, so by a broad question, there's something that says, evaluate the management skills shown by blah, Alan. For that question, it can sometimes, that type of thing can sometimes throw students because where do I start with that? Well, you start by just naming the 3 management skills and basically explaining them. So definition be the first sentence, then a second sentence, just one other thing you know about leading from having studied the course that you think is relevant to the text, right? And do the same with motivating and communicating. Whilst I'm on it and it's in my head, communicating is the one that hasn't appeared in the ABQ on its own. So there's been questions about management styles, which is, I'll come to in a second, which was actually a little bit of leading and a little bit of motivating. But there's never been a question on communicating. Now, maybe that's because it's hard to write something to the ABQ about meetings and that type of stuff, but it's not impossible. And I could certainly see some sort of question, it's possible to write in something about the barriers to communication, benefits of effective communication, or the principles, or something like that. So it's just interesting. It hasn't happened, but you still need to know it all anyway. So leading, know that definition, be very tight on it. The leadership styles, that's up there in the predicted videos. So I'd be well able to explain the 3 styles with 2 sentences of keyword info and know when they're appropriate, and kind of knowing the benefits of each. Motivation, X and Y and Maslow came up last year. Just know that with Maslow, with anything on the course that involves stages or steps or levels, you have to have them in the correct order. So with Maslow, you want to have these in the correct order. So obviously the idea, just one thing to say with Maslow as well, it does crop up the odd time that you have to explain what Maslow is. So the first thing is you want to say it's a theory of motivation that's based on a hierarchy of needs. So it's a theory of motivation based on a hierarchy of needs, and then you tag this on as your second sentence. As one need is satisfied, the need above it becomes the dominant motivator. So it's a theory of motivation based on a hierarchy of needs, and then you tag on that as a second sentence. Just you will always, with Maslow, try not to repeat what's in the heading. So let's say you're talking about Maslow and you're writing about the different levels, and you're talking about safety, the need to feel safe and secure. Just try not to repeat yourself. So it's the need for security and protection. It's a need for a long-term contract of employment. So always kind of give an example of how a business can satisfy it if it's not explicitly asked for in the question, which it probably will be anyway. Just obviously with Maslow, a little, let me get rid of that. Just a little word to help you remember. You can remember possess. So PO there is physiological. So physiological, we're covering both the P and the O or that first one. Then safety, then social, then esteem, then self-actualization. So that word covers off the stages in the correct order. So if you think of that, if you see it in the exam, it'll help you to come up with the stages in the correct order. So possess there, physiological, safety, social, esteem, and self-actualization. Communication. Look, there's been loads of questions about communication. I think it's come up in it's now 8 of the last 14 years. So it's a really important topic. But loads of the recent questions have been sort of about meetings and the role of kind of the people in meetings, the chairperson, secretary, etc. But the other part of the chapter looks kind of lightly assessed to me. So this stuff about the features of effective communication, the benefits of effective communication, the barriers to effective communication, all that sort of stuff. I'd just be well prepared for that because I haven't seen it in a while. Just this stuff, if you're asked, this is another one, give an additional point, right? If you're asked about the factors to consider when communicating, you might be asked about, you might be given a particular context. Like a few years ago, there was a question, it was like, outline the factors that whoever it was needs to consider when communicating with the board. So just make sure you answer that in the context of the question. But it's definitely one I think to give an additional point if you can. Like I do think if you're answering things in the right manner, in terms of like state, explain, and you're just giving kind of a heading and 2 sentences of development, and you're doing that throughout the entire paper, you do have time in places to give an additional point. You do have time in your ABQ to give the full links as a full sentence. So if you got the correct answer structure, you can do this, right? So you're not going to run out of time because you gave an additional point here and there. Like you obviously can't always do it, but sometimes I think it makes sense to do it. So this is a good place to do it, I think. And the reason is just, I think the market scheme is sometimes a little bit harder to predict around this stuff. I'd actually say the same thing with something like the barriers to effective communication. I'd probably give an additional point on that one as well, just to cover yourself. And like obviously if you give 4 points and they're only looking for 3, they'll take your best 3, right? So it's just a smart strategy. Just give additional points. And yeah, you need to have that definition down for the ABQ. If you get a general question about management skills, you're going to start off with those definitions of leading, motivating, communicating. So make sure that you have them down and that you are tight on them. Just one thing I'll say on the communication formats. See a letter there. Letter came up in 2018. And the question said something like, write a letter. I think you to be, like it said, you're a risk manager, write a letter to the company in the question was called Ricardo's Burgers or something there, like a restaurant. And you had to outline the types of insurance they might need. And if you think types of insurance, you cover that stuff in Unit 4. And it came up in the Unit 4 question in Part B of the paper, right? But to give your Unit 4 knowledge in the context of a letter which you cover in Unit 3. So that's really annoying for people that year. Like students sitting there going, I'm all over types of insurance. I've learned them inside out. But I didn't know a letter that well. And all of a sudden I'm snookered because of the 20 marks or 25 marks, 9 of them were for the format of a letter. So it's an important thing just to have in your back pocket. Like letters aren't redundant. So, it is a good thing to have in your back pocket in case you get caught out that way. Like there would have been loads of students that year who, and this is a really good example, get that information into their head. They learned about the types of insurance, but then like maybe they were a bit loose on the format of a letter and they got caught out with it, right? So that's something to be careful of. Good few questions in recent times just about types of meetings. So yeah, it's just the other part of that topic looks more due to be asked. Just one thing here, you see the developments of ICT or the benefits of recent developments in ICT for a business. For most questions about kind of technology, like, and it has come up in the ABQ before in this rotation back, I think it was 2010 again. For most questions on technology, you need to state a particular type of technology and explains how it impacts a particular area of the business. So I'll just, again, little tip, make sure that you take note of that. Like there was a question on technology last year to do with IKEA, and again, that was the approach needed. So this is like a general rule for, you know, if you see a question on technology anywhere really. So if the question is, well, like on the impact of technology or the benefits of technology or whatever it is. So if you're looking here, right? Sorry, yes. So if you're looking here, developments in ICT, what are the benefits for business? So instant messaging is the type of technology, and then you're explaining how it improves customer service. So type of technology, how does it explain a particular area of the business? So you could talk about like video conferencing, so you're talking about like Teams and Zoom, and you could talk about how it impacts recruitment and selection or training and development. So just link it to a particular area of the business. So that's what's highlighted. That's why they're in bold there. So social media, that reduces marketing costs. So it's the impact on that area of the business. So that is generally the kind of approach there. There's the GDPR stuff. So yeah, I put an asterisk beside that. GDPR, it's high leverage stuff because you can use it in two places. You can see it as Unit 1, you can see it as Unit 3. So know it well because it has cropped up a bit. And they can ask it as either. Moving on, so management activities then. So management activities, planning, organising, controlling. In the real world, does a manager engage in other activities? Of course they do, but for Leaving Cert Business, fairly strict, these are the only 3 management activities. Same thing with management skills. Like, does a manager use more skills than leading, motivating, communicating? Of course they do, but for the purpose of this course, they're the ones that you need to be all over and the ones that you need to know about. So with management activities, you could get a broad question again in the ABQ that like asks you to explain the 3 types of management activities. And that's a lovely question, right? If you get a question that says like evaluate the management activities by Sharon, whoever it is, you start off planning, organising, controlling, give the definitions of them, and then tag on a second point of information. Anything really that you know about those 3 things from the course. That type of question, by the way, can sometimes throw students, like if you get a question in the ABQ that says, ask you to discuss the different types of planning. So now a lot of students, they can see the headings there. They're like, oh, I just go into like mission statement, strategic, tactical, operational, and explain what they are. And you can kind of visualize the answer a little bit more, I sometimes find. But actually those broad questions that ask you to kind of touch on all 3 are easier because like there's so much, you can take any information and drop them as a point. Just show the examiner stuff that you know about those 3 types of management activity, right? Just one thing to take note of with SWOT. SWOT did crop up in one of the mocks. Was on the ABQ in 2015. I'd be like, I have it up there in the prediction videos. I'd be prepared for SWOT anyway. Just if you're asked a question and ask you to explain SWOT, don't even dream of just saying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Don't even dream about it. So like that's never going to cut it. Like, so you want to say that strengths, these are internal resources that support an successful outcome. They can be used as a competitive advantage. Weaknesses, these are internal areas of business that are underdeveloped. Opportunities, these are external factors that can benefit a business. So you need a little bit more. Don't even dream of just saying what it stands for. I would have, like, if it's a long question, be asked to apply to a business of your choice. So like I would probably have a business in my head. I think it's probably a good idea to spend a few minutes and just see, okay, can I apply these to a business of my choice? I think it's better to give an international business that the examiner is going to be aware of, that they can easily go, oh yeah, you're right, rather than some obscure thing, some business around the corner, I'd keep it to something that's recognizable. There's some generic examples there. So like these you could probably apply to any successful business. So like any successful international business probably has a good brand name. Any successful business can benefit from a change in legislation or a favorable change in consumer demand in some way. So these are kind of generic ones that you can use. The other thing I want you to take note of though, just talking about the ABQ there with SWOT. If it comes up in the ABQ, this was the case in 2015, and it was good to see it was the case in the mock there, in one of the mock papers, that if it comes up, the link, if the question asks you to conduct a SWOT analysis in the ABQ, the link is you doing the SWOT. So the question is, it's in the ABQ and it says conduct a SWOT analysis for whatever company it is. You start off there, you're heading strengths, you explain what that means, 2 sentences of keyword information. Then you have a link, and the link is you finding evidence of a strength for that business from the text. Weaknesses is your next heading. You explain that using these two sentences here. So these are internal areas that are underdeveloped. They should be minimized for whatever business it is. And then your link is finding an example of a weakness from the text. So if you're asked to do the SWOT, the link is you doing the SWOT, because back in 2015, that was just mayhem. Examples of people like dividing their page into 4 and writing down bullet points about, no. Types of planning, just be careful with types of planning. I wouldn't give, if it's a long question, I would avoid manpower planning if it's a long question. I would also avoid SWOT if it's a long question. But like, if it comes up in the ABQ and you think there's evidence of manpower planning, go with it and give it as an additional point. The reason I'm saying this is because in recent long questions where they've asked you to explain types of planning, they haven't accepted manpower planning. But recently in the ABQ, they have accepted it as a type of planning. So you just want to cover yourself. There's loads of other ones you can go with. So look, there's enough there: mission statement, strategic, tactical, operation, contingency. There's enough other ones there that you can lean on. So avoid manpower. And I say SWOT as well, because sometimes people give SWOT, I think it might be in some of the books, and SWOT seen as like a pre-planning thing. But again, I'd avoid manpower and SWOT for a long question. But if you think there's evidence of them in the ABQ, by all means, let the text guide you. The text is your best friend, and I'll include them as an additional point there. Organising. We've a good bit in organising last year, and been able to distinguish between chain of command, span of control, certainly important definitions. So I'd have 2 key sentences of keyword info to go on both of those. Knowing what influences span of control is important. We did have matrix came up last year. And again, organising is the one management activity that there's been no explicit exam question or no explicit ABQ question. So out of management skills and activities, they've never asked just communicating, and they've never asked just organising. And maybe that's because it's a bit awkward to write something into an ABQ about like matrix structures. In fact, they could do it. They could just have something about teams in there. So even though, I guess my point here, even though matrix didn't come up last year for organising, I'd still be all over it. Out of all the management activities, I'd have stock control at the management control at the very top of my list as likely ABQ questions. It just looks due to be asked. So I would be very tight on my explanations of the 4 types of control, how they're implemented, and the benefits of each. I think it looks really important. Now, there was, I think, a short question on management control last year, but I just think for the ABQ, it's too important. And if you've watched anything I've said this year, you'll know that I really do believe that. Okay. What we'll do is we'll take some questions here, then we'll take a little bit of a break, right? So where was I? Let's see. Adam, what are the best years? Okay, yeah. And then we have, Is there a difference between skill and characteristics? Should you mention management, reality, perception as well? The market scheme there's no distinction at all, so don't stress on that. Should you mention reality, perception as well? Like, it depends on the question. So like, if it's the ABQ and you think it's suggesting that that is the answer, I would include it, but I would always start with the ones I mentioned. So yeah, if you think there's evidence that like, oh, it seems that they're very future focused because they keep talking about the future and it's ABQ, go with it. But I would always start with the ones I mentioned. I think there's enough there. How much examples of cooperative and competitive do you need? I would just have a glance through past questions and you'll see, well, like, what are the relationships that they've asked for previously. I wouldn't, look, you don't have to do that, Ben. It's like, if you want to be sure and totally cover yourself, if that does come up, and it's the thing about relationships is it seems like a small part. If you think back to when you did it, it seems like such a tiny, irrelevant thing, but like it punches far above its weight at exam time. Like, it comes up loads. So like, you could rely and come up with an example at the time. I just think it's probably good to have a little bit of a glance at some of the previous ones and see, okay, have I got an example for that? But yeah, I wouldn't stress massively about it. Where did you say the Unit 6 and 7 short questions were? So Katie, I said there was a short question map. So it's in the Easter notes, which, where are they these days? You'll find them if you go to download notes and you go to Easter and you go to business, you'll get them in there. I think they're at the top of the business page and subjects as well. And in there's a short question map that shows you how frequently different topics appear as a short question. I did also previously put up the Unit 6 short questions. So again, if you scroll through the news feed, you'll find all the Unit 6 short questions in recent years. So they're all there if that's what you want to focus on. I do have like do I have a Unit 7 short question test? Yeah, I can probably show you that if you want as well. Maybe just email me. Just on the, like, I'm totally happy. I know the ask your teacher thing is closed. I'm totally happy for you to email me if you have any questions, because I know at this stage in your lives, you are going to come across things because you got a lot of time to focus on studying and doing questions. You're probably going to encounter things. So send me an email, david@grinds360.ie. And if I like it might take me a while to get back, but I will. I hopefully eventually do it. Did delegation come up last year? Off the top of my head, I don't think so. Is there a video on how to make a letter? Yeah, it'll be covered in the on-demand section in Unit 3. I think I did also cover it in one of the early grind weeks as well. So there's, yeah, a couple of videos there. What do you say was under-assessed in communication? Good question, Barry. So I'm just saying that first part, so like communications, like, it's tough going, lads, isn't it? It's about like 80 pages in your book about how to send a fucking email. But like, I see it as kind of two parts to the topic. So the second bit is all about, like, you know, meetings and the role of the different people and agendas and all that sort of stuff. And then the first part is the bit I think looks under-assessed. So the stuff about like the barriers to effective communication, the principles of effective communication, the factors to consider when communicating, the benefits of communicating. That sort of stuff just looks lightly assessed. What would you recommend leaving out? Would you recommend leaving out Unit 7 completely? Anna, you can totally do that. I believe anyway. I think like it just makes a lot of sense to me to do that. I would still cover the short questions well, but you could also, like, I would totally believe that if you want, you could cover Unit 7 and leave out Unit 6 completely. A number of students got a H1 in my class last year. That was the strategy that they followed. They left out Unit 6 and they focused on Unit 7. And the reason is, right, that, and this is assuming, like, this is all based on the assumption that, like, the exam that you see is, follows what had happened in the past, which is quite likely. And Unit 6 and Unit 7 are generally one long question each. In Unit 6, so they're one long question each. And Unit 7 is 3 topics. And Unit 6 is 5. And I think Unit 6 is mad boring, so I prefer to focus on Unit 7 if it's going to give me the same, coverage on the paper. But like, yeah, I do think you can leave out. But look, you want to cover yourself well for the short questions, and then it's obviously putting you under pressure to be all over the units that you are covering well. How come you can't use SWOT, but you could potentially use it in the ABQ? It's just the way the market scheme has been in the past, Jack. It's that they haven't accepted the long questions, the most recent ones. So I'd just be careful. There's enough other ones you can use, right? So I wouldn't use them in a long question. Just don't, to cover yourself. So the thing about Leaving Cert Business for me, Jack, is the brilliant thing about it is there's a lot of certainty. You know, the course is going to change, you know, next year. It's been around for ages. So like we know a lot about the exam structure, exam layout, marking schemes. So whenever there's a little bit of uncertainty, I'm like, let's just avoid that because there's loads of certainty elsewhere. So just focus on things that are certain, which are the other types of planning. So I don't like when the marking scheme changes, and it does. Like, so yeah, I would just focus on the other ones, Jack. Okay. Let's take a quick break. Let's just take a quick break, just a quick 5-minute, right? Let's take a quick 5-minute and come back at 10 past, right? Yeah, so 10 past, quick break. Quick 5-minute break here. We'll kick off again at 10 past. Okay, so a couple of questions. First one there. Sorry, one sec. Jack, no, sorry, one before that. Charlie, with the advantages and disadvantages of the org structures, is 2 of each enough? So Charlie, my advice always, when people want to know how many points should I learn, is to go back, look at previous questions, see what you would have gotten away with previously. Because I know if I say I only learned 2 and then you need 4 this year, then you're like, oh, that guy told me to learn 2, but I actually needed 4. But as a guideline, I think it's a pretty good one to go back and see, well, what would have covered me in the past? That would be my advice there, Charlie. That's always, if ever you're asking yourself, well, how many points do I need to give for anything? That's the approach I'd take. How many would I have needed in the past? And use that as a guideline. Next question there. Sorry, could you please pin the short questions pack on the Unit 6-7 as I'm unable to find it? Thanks. I will. Okay, I'll do that after this. I'll stick them up the top of the newsfeed. And what I might do actually, I'll pin them on top of the newsfeed, and then I'll also stick them on the business page, because there'll be other subjects, there'll be important stuff happening for the newsfeed. So I will do that. But and then in that post up in the newsfeed, I'll also tell you where to find them on the subject page as well. When I print off the worksheets, there's extra pages with blank bits. They are for you to test yourself. Yeah, that's totally the idea, Jack, is that, like, I also put up a study plan with that, and the idea is that you build them into your study plan. Like, yeah, the spare space is totally for that. Any advice for going into the next couple of weeks? So we might touch that on that. We'll talk about it at the end, maybe, John, if we have time and if people are up for it. Adam, is there a way to predict Unit 7 long question? Is it because you can predict and we can learn a certain topic on a chance it was it? I don't really understand the question. Is there a way to predict Unit 7 long questions? Is it a case you could predict and we can learn a certain topic on off chance it was it? Yeah, like I have some Unit 7 predictions up there on the business page. So like if you want to think they're the ones I think are maybe most likely due to be asked, you could go and look at them. They are a good bit down, but they are there. So Matthew, I don't know what you're talking about, the Unit 6 ones. What's important for organising? So you need to be tight in the definitions, be able to explain the org structures, and yeah, I suppose the implications of moving from one to the other. There was something else there. Oh yeah, sorry. For Unit 1, is the Director of the Equality Tribunal Act the same as the Employment Equality Act? No. So what happened was, I think maybe you got back to 2014 or something, the Equality Tribunal became the Workplace Relations Commission. So you won't see anything on the Equality Tribunal. The Equality Tribunal became the Workplace Relations Commission. Okay, into Unit 4. So these are the blank spaces like that. I didn't have them on what you were looking at on my screen last for Units 1 to 3. But here you'll see those blank spaces. Yeah, I got a question about them. They are totally for you to practice the keywords associated with everything. So first thing then from Unit 4, like if you were to ask me what's the single most important unit, I'd say Unit 4. Like I think it's the unit that will probably get you the most, if you do all the Unit 4 questions, will give you the most coverage across the paper, like maybe up to, could be 35% of your exam, maybe if you did all the Unit 4 questions, which is a lot. Sorry, one thing I wanted to say there, I meant to say that when looking at management activities there with control, if you look here, right, so you open up those Unit 4 notes and you go to Human Resource Management. Sorry, I'll just give you a sec to do that. So go to the newsfeed, open up the Unit 4 ones and go to HRM. So with HRM, 6 functions of the human resource department that you need to know about. For all 6, you need to be able to explain it, so give the definition. You need to, if there are steps or stages, you need to know them, and you need to know the benefits, right? But if the first one here is manpower planning, if you look at the definition of manpower planning, and this is the same as it applies when we see it in Unit 3 there as well. So it's making sure the business has the people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. You're using the word right 3 times there. So like that's lovely. You'll sing manpower planning and you use the word right loads. There is another place in the course where you will also use the word right over and over to define it, and that's stock control. So when you're defining stock control, which is definitely an important one, because I just said that I think management activities is an important one for the ABQ, and management control in particular, really important for the ABQ. Manpower planning and stock control is about having the right amount of stock in the right place, the right time to meet production requirements. So very similar definitions. So 2 places in the course, if you're defining either of these 2 things, you use the word right over and over. It makes them easy to remember. So just loosely on Unit 4 whilst we're here and we're kind of introducing it. Like for the ABQ, I think it's harder to predict. Like nearly all the Unit 4 topics have cropped up in the ABQ. If we take it that like they can't really ask about cash flow forecasts or ratios, that means they can ask about human resource management, change management, tax and insurance. They've all cropped up, and sources of finance. So they've all come up, right? Out of those, one of those has come up twice as much as any other one, and that is change management strategies. So I would just, there's 10 strategies for managing change. Some of them are more important than others, but it's a really important one for the ABQ. Out of all of Unit 4, like sources of finance, I'd be all over it. I think it's really important, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's quickly just have a look at HRM here. So for the 6 functions, manpower planning, be able to explain it. Manpower planning does have steps, so be able to state and explain those steps. Recruitment and selection, there was a good bit on that last year. Training and development, I think, is really important. It just looks due to be asked. So out of manpower planning, out of human resource, out of HRM, training, development and performance appraisal are the 2 that I would really be well prepared for. So it could crop up, you could see a short question on, distinguish between induction training and staff development, or you could see it as a Unit 4 question, or you could see it in the ABQ. So just being very familiar with training and development, I would highly recommend. Nothing else really there. Pay and rewards, good information to know. Anytime you're given an answer where you're talking about rewards, you should name those rewards. Or anytime you're talking about resources, you should name those resources. So like, just to give an example, like let's say, bring it back to Unit 2 for a sec, and you're writing about like the methods a business can use to promote entrepreneurship, and you're like, oh, they could offer rewards. I would name what those rewards could potentially be. So profit sharing schemes, or share ownership schemes, or bonuses. So name them. And that's you dropping in some language from the course that you know about. It's using keywords, right? So questions on rewards are lovely. If you get long questions like outline the different types of financial and non-financial rewards a business can provide, that's an amazing question, because there's so many answers that you can draw from, right? Performance appraisal is the other one there that I think like I'd be very tight on. So I wouldn't cut any corners here with HRM, but appraisal and training and development, you would be mad not to know inside out. So with performance appraisal, being tight on that definition. And you see here, you've the benefits can be asked from an employer's perspective or an employee's perspective. So it can be from an employer or employee, but these points are the ones that overlap for both. So that's why I have them in there. You can use those for either perspective. And that last one, employer-employee relations, is the one that crops up the least. And in the past, I think there's only one time in the past you have been able to avoid it. Okay, so then change management. Again, with change management, there's certain ones that are more important than others. Like I said, there was 10 change management strategies. A lot of them were just definitions. So like one change management strategy is communicate with employees, provide rewards, but again, name them. So give bonuses or flexi time. So name the type of rewards if you're talking about that in the context of change management. See, controller, facilitator, these are all just really like a definition. That's all you really need to know for them. But other ones you need to know about in more detail. So empowerment you need to know about in more detail, for example. Teamwork you need to know about in more detail. Just one thing. I said that there was like 10 change management strategies. I said the change management had come up twice as much as any of the other Unit 4 topics on the ABQ. Let's say that you know in your head, you're in the ABQ, and you know that communicating with employees is a change management strategy. So business should let employees know why they're making a change, why it's necessary, and they should let them know the consequences of not making these changes. So they should say to employees, look, I know this is hard, but we're doing this because we have to, we need to remain competitive, and this is the way that we're going to reduce our costs. So they need to explain why we're doing it, what are the consequences. If we don't do it, we're going to get out of business, we're going to lose market share, whatever it is. And it will make the change more palatable, so it reduces tension and uncertainty, right? So let's say you understand that and you know that communicating with employees is a change management strategy that you've studied. And let's say you're doing the ABQ and there's no evidence whatsoever that they use communication. You can't give that as an answer. So what you know from having studied the course, like the theory or the textbook knowledge that you have to actually be able to apply it to the applied business question. So you can't throw in communication if there's no evidence that communication was used. You couldn't say, oh, they can reward employees and use that if there's no evidence in the ABQ text that they rewarded employees, right? And so empowerment, one of the main ones. So I know about all of them, but some are more important than others. I say empowerment is one of the more important ones because you tend to get questions about empowerment in its own right as a separate thing. So having that definition is important, and then the benefits and also the risks. Total quality management, again, another one. So you can ask questions about TQM in its own right. So out of all of these are kind of the more important than teamwork. There was a little question on teamwork last year, but certainly empowerment, TQM, knowing the definitions. And an important thing to remember here, guys, if you're asked about the benefits of TQM, you have to relate the benefit to the principle, right? See, a lot of students get caught out with that. So what you have in the notes there, right, is you have the principle and then you've got the benefit associated with that. So one of the principles of a total quality management approach is that the business focuses on the customer. So that means that they conduct market research to identify the customer's needs, and then they alter their product to meet those needs. The benefit then, you get increased sales and customer satisfaction. So this is the benefit, but it's linked to that principle. So you need to link them, right? The next principle of TQM is that they strive for continuous improvement, which means that they aim to have 0 defects in production. So every product is perfect. The benefit of that is there's less waste and less refunds. They're not having to deal with customer giving refunds because goods aren't of merchantable quality. There's less waste of raw materials in defective products. Everything's perfect. The next principle is empowerment, and the benefit of empowerment is increased employee motivation and job satisfaction. So just a crucial thing if you're explaining empowerment is that employees are allowed to make decisions without consultation. So that's what empowerment is really about. It's not like freedom to do whatever. It's that they can make decisions without consultation. That's what the examiner wants to see. Next principle is teamwork. The benefit is it needs to increase creativity and productivity. Just another thing you'll see there. See that? Link between teamwork and creativity. Loads of times throughout the course, you'll see that market scheme. You can see a question that says like, what's a benefit of TQM? And you'll say, well, if the principle is teamwork, the benefit of that is creativity. If you're dealing with a question that asks the benefit of a matrix organizational org structure where they're putting the teams, it's that there's greater entrepreneurship, so there's greater creativity. You could see a question from Unit 4 here again that asks about teamwork on its own. What's the benefits of teamwork? It's greater creativity. So that link between teamwork and creativity comes up loads in marketing schemes. So it's just a good thing to have in your head, right? So we did see something last year on stages in team development, forming, storming, norming, performing. But yeah, you'll see there's 10 there. Employee participation, again, look, if you were, I'm not mad at cutting any corners, but it's the one that traditionally you might have gotten away without knowing. Okay, moving on there. Look, sources of finance is the next thing. So I think these notes on source of finance might be a little bit different. The ones I'm using here to the ones I put up in the newsfeed. So maybe for these, if you just look at my screen for a second. With sources of finance, I want you to take note, and this, it did come up in one of the mocks as well, that the link shows the need. So the whole idea of source of finance, like if it comes up in the ABQ, the idea is it will always be that you need, it generally tells you in the question, but it'll say that you need to refer to one short, medium and long. So one of each. And the whole idea is that the source of finance that you state and explain in the ABQ, you have to find a sentence in the text that illustrates an appropriate need that can be paid for with the source of finance that you're recommending. So let's say, for example, the ABQ question says, outline the different sources of finance that blah company can use, refer to short, medium and long term in your answer. And you go short term. And I would write the word short term and flag to the examiner, here, look, the short term ones, here they are. And then your heading is bank overdraft. And then you've got 2 lines where you explain what a bank overdraft is. And then your link has to be a line from the text that shows a business need that can be paid for with a bank overdraft. So it has to be a short-term need. It has to be like paying for, buying stock, raw materials, paying wages, light and heat, something short-term. Like you can't say buying delivery vehicles. You can't say, expanding the business, buying new premises. So the link there, you're matching the need with the source of finance that you identify, right? So it's just something to have in your head. With sources of finance, I think they are very important. I think they look overdue. If they don't come up in the ABQ, they look overdue as a long question anyway. Just know with the sources of finance that an easy way of looking at the advantages and disadvantages is you're kind of always looking at it through the same lens. You're always asking, like, is there interest? Is there collateral needed? And then when you get into the long-term source of finance, what's the impact on control of the business? Are they giving away control or are they not? And you can totally throw in the advantages and disadvantages as a point of information. But really important. Cash flow did crop up last year. Okay. With tax and insurance then, so moving on to tax and insurance. So this is stuff, right, this is, I said, my notes here are a little bit different. This is different to what you have. I think I left this out of the ones that are on the newsfeed. So what I'll do is I'll post this afterwards. Principals insurance came up last year, but just to help you remember, you can remember this sentence. So last year's question, actually, it fed you the terms. It basically said, like, explain to me what indemnity is, explain to me what insurable interest is, etc. Now, and remember, any exam question that basically says, here's a term, tell me about it, you'll always have to explain it using 2 sentences of keyword info, which is a little bit different to a question that says, outline the principles of insurance, where you're going to get marks for identifying that insurable interest and indemnity are principles, right? So you can remember this as a sentence to help you remember them. I understand it's Sophie's choice, and then that'll help you to remember the principles if you need to. So the I is insurable interest, the U is utmost good faith, the I there is indemnity, the S is subrogation, and the C is contribution. Average clause doesn't pop up too often. It did come up last year, calculation of average clause, of a payout using average clause. Just know that average clause, if you're explaining it, and I had like that question when it does come up like it did last year, if you have to do a calculation on the payout using average clause, if you're asked to explain why it's the case, you just want to say that it's linked to indemnity. So indemnity is the principle, right? Insurance terms to know, yeah, they're all good. I wouldn't skip any of them. So that's all important. But I think types of insurance, really important, right? So if I'm looking at this topic, I'm like, tax and insurance. Tax is one of the most common short questions. And then insurance, there's a little bit on types of insurance the last couple of years, but like nothing really meaty. So I think types of insurance really worth knowing about because it does have ABQ potential as well. Just with types of insurance, some of them are particularly important, right? Types of insurance, like there was a question, that question I mentioned, by the way, so remember that 2018 question, I said you had to write a letter to Ricardo's Burgers advising them on the types of insurance they needed. You needed to have one of these 3 were compulsory. So you needed to have one of these. You needed to have product liability, public liability, or employer liability insurance. So they're certainly the three most important. And any question that asks you to outline types of insurance, and it generally asks you for a particular type of business, I would certainly be giving at least one of these. These are the three most important. Just know that previously, see, in the past, buildings and contents in some years have been accepted as one type of insurance and sometimes been accepted separately. So like I don't like the uncertainty there. I hate uncertainty here. So I'd be very much focused on the other ones because sometimes you see them together in the marketing scheme, sometimes they're separate. I don't like that uncertainty, so let's just be all over the other ones, right? I wouldn't, again, like it came up one year to explain fidelity guarantee insurance. So like you can be given the terms. So if you're planning like I'm going to know these types of insurance, I wouldn't cut any out here is my point, because I think it's too important. Types of tax a business pays, all this stuff is like really important. Types of tax a household pays. Like I said to you a second ago, I said tax is a really common short question, and you can see why. Like if acronyms are now look at pretty much a guaranteed short question. Look at all this, so it's like it's perfect fodder for short questions. That question down here, just to tell you, right, the differences between household and businesses in managing tax, when that's come up, it's like throwing so many students, but it's such a lovely question because you can name a type of tax. So you can say like corporation tax, and you can say like a business needs to pay it and a household doesn't, and you've dealt with the question there. So it's actually a way easier question than you think. Just on the calculation of take-home pay, that's the other thing to take note of here. There's three kind of common errors in calculating take-home pay. So one is when you're calculating your taxes, you have to do it taking away the holiday voucher or taking away the benefit, adding in the holiday voucher. It's generally a holiday voucher. So when you're calculating your taxes, just make sure that you're including any vouchers that are mentioned in the question, because that's one way that you can fuck that up, because every calculation that you make will be wrong if you're calculating it off the wrong figure. Second thing that people get wrong on calculating the take-home pay is they don't know what to do with tax credits. I see some weird stuff with tax credits. So tax credits, we love tax credits, they're a good thing. They reduce the amount of PAYE that you have to pay. And then the third thing to be careful on those questions is when you're calculating the final figures for the actual monthly take-home, in that case, you aren't including the holiday voucher. You're not going to include it. So you do include the holiday voucher when calculating taxes, but when you're actually calculating the take-home pay, you're not working off that figure. Again, if that's confusing, I covered that off in a full grinds class. So if you're a little bit confused by those take-home pay questions, I have noticed in the past that actually students who are maybe H4, H5, H3, maybe H4, H3 standard can do pretty well in take-home pay questions. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there that you can pick up easy marks on, and then there's those three common mistakes you need to be careful of. I call them the golden rules. Just on ratios don't require, there's two grinds weeks that I covered ratios in detail. I think it is quite likely to see a ratios long question. It's one of the most common short questions as it is. And just know that, like, if you're someone who thinks to yourself, I don't like ratios, I'm just not dealing with them. Like, I'm just ruling them out. Well, you're really limiting yourself. You might be ruling out one of the most common short questions. So like, it's a really limiting approach. The short question versions are way easier. You don't need a massive in-depth knowledge of accounts to do ratios the way you might think, right? So the only basic things that you need to know from accounts are this: how gross profit is calculated, and then maybe how net profit is calculated. And even for most questions, you'll get away without knowing that. But if you want to be totally covering yourself, you need to know them. Just remember, with ratios questions, any question with ratios, you're always starting with the formula. Always. Sometimes formula, getting that in paper can be like 20% of the marks. So get that down. If you're doing a long question of ratios and you have to analyze the ratios, the kind of, I suppose, generic approach for analyzing ratios is And this is a bit that people, I think, find hard, right? This is a general approach that will cover you for most of those analyzed questions for ratios. So like if you do a long question ratios, you have to calculate the ratio and then you'll always have to compare it to something. So either last year or to competitors in the industry. So like let's say you calculate something like gross profit margin and this year it's 5%, but last year it was 10%. So state the trend is just to say that it has decreased from 10% to 5%. This is a negative trend and you'll get marks for that. So like the calculations, I'm just thinking with ratios, the maths is easy. Like you have to learn the formulas. There's no doubt about that, you have to learn the formulas. But you learn the formulas, you could see a part A of a long question that is just 4 ratios that you have to calculate and that's 20 marks. That 20 marks is accessible to anyone who can learn a formula and multiply or divide. Like genuinely it is. So the analysis part, if you state the trend, then state an implication. So the gross profit margin has fallen from 10% to 5%. This is a negative trend. This might mean the business might struggle to attract investors in the future. Then if you can state another implication, that's good, or suggest a way it can be improved. This might be because the cost of raw materials are too high and they should find a cheaper supplier, something like that. So if you can do that, you'll be more than covered for the analysis part of the questions. Don't have time to go into too much detail here. Single biggest thing though, if you were to ask me with ratios, what will make my life easier? It's this. Single biggest thing. Know how to calculate capital employed if you're not given it. It's the single biggest thing. So if you just want one thing walking away here about ratios, know how to calculate capital employed. There's 3 things that go into it. 3 things. So it's retained earnings, it's share capital, and it's your loan. So you can go back and focus on that, right? Because I want to move on. It's a lot of time in ratios. Sources of finance. Okay. Grand. Any questions there? Let's see. Can you see ratio analysis being partly ABQ? It's hard, Ben. It is difficult. Like, I mean, look, nothing's impossible, but it's difficult. It hasn't happened, and it would be extremely harsh because like a lot of people don't like it. How strategies to manage your change do you need and source of finance for short, long, and medium? I'd certainly again, coming back to what I said earlier, I'd always check what I would have gotten away with in the past there. Like 3 of each is probably enough for short, medium, and long, like by a long shot. When was the last ratios long question? Have it up there in the predictions. I'm going to say it was the last time it came up like as a long question, it was like the debt equity ratio. But it's been a while since we had a deferred paper as the answer to your question in 2022, I think, where there was what I call a general ratios question, which is where you have to calculate 4 different types, so profitability, liquidity, and gearing, right? So that was the fair paper, and I think it was 22, if not 23, I think it was 22. That's the last time. And then the last time in the Leaving Cert proper, we had like a question about debt equity more recently. And debt equity is the most commonly asked one. So yeah, if you're planning on doing ratios, make sure you're all over that. Okay, let's move on to Unit 5 there. Sorry if you've already answered this, but which order would you have the units learned in order of importance? So what I did was when I put up that I mentioned earlier, I said that there's, with this post on the newsfeed that's pinned at the top there, there's also a study guide in there. See if I go over here. So there's a 4-week study plan, and the way I designed that plan was kind of in a reverse order of importance. So I think I had like Unit 6 first, then Unit 7, then Units 2 and 3, then Units 1, and then Unit 4. So you're studying Unit 4 closest to your exam, and I just said before we went through Unit 4 there, I think that's the most important unit. So to answer your question, Unit 4 is the most important, Unit 1 is the second most important, Unit 2 and 3 are then the next most important, then Unit 5, then Unit 7, then Unit 6 for me, like 6 and 7, look whatever order you want, but like that's the way I deal with it. So Unit 4, Unit 1, Unit 2, 3, because you have to know them for the ABQ, you can't avoid them, Unit 5, and then yeah, I'd go 7 or 6, 7 then 6. Okay. Let's have a flick through Unit 5 here. So if you want to open that one up. Do you have a sheet with all the acronyms on it? Again, in the Easter notes, there is a sheet with all the acronyms that have been asked. That's not to say that like there isn't other ones you can be asked about, just that is what has been asked. So Easter notes, if you go to download notes, go into Easter Business, you'll get them there, right? And there is a list of all the acronyms that have been asked in recent times there. Okay, so into Unit 5. Anything to say about Unit 5? No, look, let's just go through it. Okay, from identifying opportunities, I haven't hidden my absolute belief that stages in the product development process is really important. Just remember, we do see this. I wouldn't leave out any stages here, because you can be asked about different stages on their own. Like there's been a question in the past that asked about prototype development on its own. Just make sure that with stages in the process, again, they have to come in the correct order. They have to come in the correct order. So same way with Maslow, same way with stages in product life cycle, have to come in the correct order. The ones that you don't want to mix up, that people routinely mix up, are these two guys here. So concept development and product screening, they are really, really important. So just make sure that you're not mixing them up. When you get down here, like a good general tip to kind of help you avoid the trap of waffling about each stage is to kind of state what the purpose of the stage is. So with product screening, the purpose is to identify those with commercial potential. With concept development, it's to develop the idea into something real with a USP. With feasibility study, the purpose is to see if it's financially, commercially, environmentally feasible. With prototype development, the purpose is to test it, to see how it looks, to see can we actually make it, basically, to see if there's any defects in production. Purpose of test marketing is to get feedback from the target market so you can make changes before you go into full launch. But really, really important. Just questions in the past and that have asked you, generally been those questions where you have to refer to a business from the question in your answer, so just look out for that. So moving on, business startup. There was a question in the past that asked something about something to be careful of there. I see it as sources of finance for a startup. So for a startup, you probably wouldn't be giving retained earnings for a source of finance for a startup, because startups probably don't have a whole lot of profits they can reinvest in the company, like the first year in business, something like that. Production methods cropped up last year. Business plan, just like the questions, business plan does look like it's due to be asked, but most likely, important thing, benefits of a business plan, or you might be asked about the different sections. Like we don't really see questions anymore that ask you to do a business plan, but you could be asked about the sections. But yeah, the benefits of a business plan, probably most likely question. Uses a business plan to stakeholders. Break-even analysis, again, remember, one of the most common short questions. So if you're one of those people who thinks, I hate break-even, I hate ratios, you're limiting yourself. Based on historical trends, you're massively limiting yourself. They're the two most common short questions. So at least if you think, I don't fancy a long question on ratios, don't fancy a long question on break-even, at least try and have a look at some of the short question ones because they're way easier, and you know it just seems based on past trends they're quite likely. Just with break even, remember a couple of tricks here in calculating when you're doing the graph. I'll just scribble them up here. I see students doing break even, and they fall down at one of the first hurdles. That like, because the y-axis is both costs and revenue, like that is just a head fuck for a lot of people. They're like, I can't. This is too much. There's a lot going on, and they don't know what they're what number the y-axis is going up to. The biggest number on the y-axis. So when you're drawing the y-axis, the biggest number will always be. So when you're labeling it, total revenue at forecast output. So if you just have that in your head, like let's say you can do the maths part of ratios, and a lot of people fall into this category where like you can do the calculations, but actually drawing the break-even chart's a bit of a just fries your head. There's some really low-hanging fruit with even with the diagram. Like if you can get both the axes down and label it, and then put in your fixed costs, you're nearly all the way there. Like you're 70% of the way to that. The only difference between 70% and 100% on a break-even question, right, is being able to actually draw your total revenue and total costs. Like that's the only difference. So like I see students all the time who are like, I can do the maths bit, but I forget about it. And they don't bother with the chart, but actually you're leaving like a crazy amount of marks behind by just not getting a title, a y-axis, an x-axis, and a fixed cost line. If you get those four guys down, you've basically gone from 50% not doing the chart to 70% of the marks for getting the basics. So there is low-hanging fruit there. So, you know, don't just rule it out. At least do that. So biggest number on the y-axis, sorry, I should say y-axis there, is always total revenue forecast output. And then remember, you only need 3 lines on your graph. So you need fixed cost, total revenue, and total cost. And if you go back and look at the grind where we did that, the best thing to drawing those is to draw any line, you need 2 points. And then you just draw those, you just join those 2 points with a ruler. So for these 3 lines you need 2 points. So you need to know what they are at 0, so to draw those 3 lines, you need to know what are my fixed costs at 0, what are my fixed costs to forecast output. In that case, it'll be the same because fixed costs are always the same. So that's why I said that's low-hanging fruit, because like you don't have to do any calculations. It's just a horizontal line. So if you can get your title, label your axis, and get the markings on it right, and then get your fixed costs in there, you've got an additional 20% from just doing the maths, right? So fixed costs, you need to know what is it at 0, what is it at forecast output. Total revenue, what is it at 0? Well, it's going to be 0. And what is it at forecast output? And then total cost, well, what are they at 0? It's going to be whatever your fixed cost is. And what is it at forecast output? So you just get those 2 points and then you join them with a ruler. So that's the key there, right? But yeah, the short question version, way easier. Okay, moving on. Market research, so overdue. I have it up there on the predicted videos. I like massive thing to look out for with market research. Just now the questions in the past. Sorry, I'll make this clear in a sec. There was a question a few years ago and it said something like, discuss the market research techniques available to, I think they were called all-weather wellies or something like that. And what loads of students did was they looked at that and they were like, okay, market research techniques, surveys, focus groups, CSO, observation. And it was a 20-mark question and they wrote about 4 of those types of each. But actually market research techniques are field and desk, and it was 10 marks for dealing with field, 10 marks for dealing with desk. So the way that 10 marks were broken down was like 4 marks for your first bit of info about field. So giving the definition that this is primary research, involves getting information direct from the customer. It's new information, first-hand information. Then for a second bit of information for the next 4 marks, you could have given anything. You could have given an advantage of it. You could have named some of those techniques, some of those forms of field. And then 2 marks was for a link to the business in the question, right? So just be careful with that. Market research techniques in the past has meant field and desk, and students bled away a load of marks there because they didn't realize that. I think market research is really, really important. I've been saying for a while, it's overdue. So it's certainly overdue now. Other thing but able to have the definitions about field and desk is important, so don't overlook that. First thing I'd be saying about either is whether it's primary or secondary. So give that as your first thing. And then field, I see so much nonsense. Oh, it's about going out into the field and getting information. Don't repeat what you've written in the heading or what you're talking about. It's gathering first-hand information. It's new information. It's primary research. Desk, it's using information that's already been gathered. It already exists. It's secondary research. And then just know when you're dealing with the advantages and disadvantages of each, you're always comparing them to each other. So like field research is expensive, desk is inexpensive. So the advantages are always relative to the other. It's just a way to help you think your way through it. Market segmentation, just one thing to be careful of here. So, with market segmentation, it does come up a bit, and the question's always the same. You explain it, give the benefits of it, or the ways a market can be segmented. So a market can be segmented by demographic. So that's going to be your heading in that question. And then you explain. So you're breaking the market into groups based on age, gender, family, income, or job. If you answered that question with age as your heading, you wouldn't pick up the marks because that's not the key word. So the key word is demographic, and age is an example of segregating a market by demographics. Just be careful to be accurate with these guys, I suppose, is my point. And niche markets cropped up last year. Okay. On the marketing mix. So marketing mix features somewhere nearly every single year. It was worth a full 70 marks last year. So we had a full long question in the marketing mix and a short question. So it's 60 marks for a long question. And then we had 10 marks for a short question. And out of the 4 P's, so product, price, place, promotion, last year's questions were all on promotion and price, if I remember. So there was nothing on product or place. And I actually think the product part of the marketing mix looks very underdone in recent years. So I'd just be all over that. And again, it's up there in the predictive videos. I've gone through it. So within the product part of the marketing mix, the big one for me is the product life cycle. So again, you have to have them in the correct order. So introduction, growth, maturity, saturation, decline. You need to be able to draw the product life cycle. And you probably have to apply them to a business of your choice. So again, I'd be prepared for that. Same way I said with SWOT, just sit down for a few minutes and be like, okay, this is a likely question. Can I apply them to a business of my choice? And then the kind of bit of advice I have around explaining, like I see a lot of waffle from students explaining the different stages. So to avoid that, if you're explaining the stages of the product life cycle, try and focus on 2 things. So the first thing is you focus on how the business is behaving. And the second thing is you focus on what's happening to the finances at that stage. So if you're looking at the introduction stage here, right? Yes, the product is introduced to the market. But in terms of how the business is behaving, they have to spend loads on advertising to create awareness. So that's what they're doing. In terms of the impact on finances, sales are slow and profits, if any, are low. In the growth stage, how's the business behaving? Well, they're investing in production to meet demand because things are starting to take off. What's the impact on finances? Sales and profits increase rapidly and awareness grows. One other point there, if you're drawing the diagram for accuracy, you want to have the peak of your diagram is at the far side of maturity. Again, look, I'm obviously flying through things here, but in the prediction videos, I go through this in more detail. So if this is alien to you, go and watch that, right? Those prediction videos, they're on the business page. It'll just help with the accuracy because a lot of people get that wrong. And again, just make sure if you have to draw the product life cycle, getting a title on it, easy marks so people bleed away, and then having all your labels in there. So that, like, the biggest thing the H1 student is doing that everyone else isn't is that attention to detail. They will never give away those marks. They will never not have a title. They will never not label their axis. They will always make sure that they label the curve sales revenue. Their attention to detail is one of the biggest separators. So if your attention to detail is not amazing, you can improve that by constantly doing questions and checking how did I did there, what did I miss, what do I need to be aware of, what mistake am I consistently making. Sorry, there you have it. Yeah, you see the far side of maturity, that's the peak of your diagram. So it should be from that point starting to go into decline and starting to come down the other side of it. Real kink in a market scheme. Methods to extend the product lifecycle. Be careful with this one. So this is really important. So if you're asked about how a business can extend the product lifecycle, like there was a question a few years ago, I think it was about Cadbury's, and it's a question about like a chocolate bar and how could they could extend the product lifecycle. You couldn't say that they could introduce a new flavor bar and change the packaging, because they're both to do with the product element of the marketing mix. So you had to, the 2 points that you made had to be from different parts of the marketing mix. It had to be different P's. This is madness. This is a great example of how like Leaving Cert Business is a game. Like it's, the most elaborate game, as Simon says, that you've ever played. So like here, loads of students would have come up with good ideas that were feasible in the real world about how a business could extend the product life cycle. But now the marketing scheme says that you can only suggest one thing about product, one thing about price, one thing about place, one thing about promotion. So what you could have done there is said, oh, they can introduce a new flavor bar, or they could change pricing strategy and suggest change. That would have been fine, but you couldn't have suggested two things from the 1P, right? So something to be careful of. Pricing strategy has been a good few questions. And then promotion, just one thing to be careful with promotion, and I mean very careful. See these four guys here. These are promotional techniques. There's only four of them on the course, and you need to know about the four of them, right? So advertising, public relations, sales promotion, and personal selling. They're promotional techniques. So a lot of students, what they'll do is they'll confuse promotional techniques with sales promotion. They'll confuse this with this. So if you get a question that asks about promotional techniques and it's a 20 marker or 15 marker, they want you to talk about 3 or 4 of these. If you get a question that asks you about sales promotion, they want you to talk about these things. So, if you get a question on sales promotion and you're writing about advertising and public relations, you're killing yourself. So it's a real easy way to bleed away a lot of marks. So definitely big asterisk, one to be careful with. And then channels of distribution, that's the other P place that we haven't seen. So yeah, certainly been familiar with that, important. Okay, I'll quickly move on. The last thing here with business expansion, mentioned in the prediction videos, like types of expansion, really common. It's come up 6 of the last 9 years, I think it is. And franchising is the one there that I really like to look at for this year. I'd be well prepared for a question on franchising. You can remember in terms of reasons to expand, I won't give you the memory cue, it's in the notes, but it's snapped. Types of expansion, look at franchise. Just make sure that you do not mix the franchisor with the franchisee. So if you're asked about like franchising as a startup option, that's a Unit 6 question. Or if you're, because it's for the franchisor. The franchisee, sorry, it's a franchisee. So the franchisee is like an employee, franchisor is like an employer. You have someone who works for you, they set up another franchise, another part of your business. So if you're asked about a startup option, really that's a Unit 6 question, it's about the franchisee. But if you're asked about franchising a method of expansion, that's the franchisor who's growing their business and expanding. So they're different questions, and again, students can mix them up and you bleed away loads of marks, so just don't mix the two up. Franchisee, franchisor, really, really important. Okay. And I'd just be all over the advantages, disadvantages of each. Okay, that's Unit 5. Any questions there? Questions? Okay, let's take a little break there, 10 minutes, and let's take 10-minute break there and come back at 12:10. Okay, we get Sorry, I think that got cut off there for a sec, guys. So if you are still out there, you might just let me know in the chat. We didn't all go home. So yeah, that did get cut off. So just if you're still there, just say hello, ask a question, whatever. And yeah, we'll kick off again at 10 past. Connor, I don't think so, right? But what I'll do is, if you do an ABQ, so like I stuck one up in the newsfeed last week, so this is another sample that I came up with myself. There's also 5 samples in the Easter notes. Again, they're ones I've come up with myself. So if you do any of them, or if you pick a past paper question or a past mock question, past ABQ, and you want to send them to me, I'll correct them for you, all right? So if you, yeah, you'll try and get it in as soon as possible. Like the rest of that, like the purpose of when we were thinking that ABQ class, the kind of idea was that that's what we were going to do. The remainder of that in-person class would have been just me going through answer structure and stuff it's totally there on the platform for you. Covered it in the Easter class. It is there in the ABQ row, the very first video. I go through the answer structure layout and all that stuff. So the only thing was we were going to try and see if we could maybe do like an ABQ test. But if you want to give yourself an ABQ under exam conditions and then send it to me, I'll have a look over for you and I'll send you a video feedback on it, all right? If that's fair enough. Okay, let's crack on, lads. So if you want to, on the newsfeed there, right, we'll get through this pretty quickly because I've already gone on pretty longer than anticipated. So on the newsfeed, if you want to just crack open the Unit 6 and 7 ones there from this. So Unit 7 is there and Unit 6 is there. So Unit 6, first thing there is categories of industry, right? And I make I don't try and hide how little I like the category of industries style questions where it's like you're asked about trends in category of industry. It is a really common question from Unit 6. It came up last year. What are the current trends in the primary sector was last year's one. And the reason I don't like those questions is just coming back to the point I was making earlier about certainty in the market schemes and stuff. So those questions, like you might think, I've got a good sense of what the current trends are in a particular industry, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be the points that they're looking for. Like on last year's one about the primary sector, there was like 1 point about climate change, and then the next point was about the environment. And then, so I would never have anticipated that they were 2 separate points in the market scheme. So I'm not a fan of these current trends questions now. If you're somebody who studies economics, if you're somebody who has a good sense of what's happening in the world, you don't really like a lot of the kind of learning part of like business, of like been really confined to having to give specific terms, maybe this is a question for you. But I don't like the lack of certainty. I would encourage you, if you're doing these questions on categories of industry, it's definitely a question to give an additional point on. So I might just get you to scribble down some generic sort of things that are affecting all categories of industry in Ireland at the moment, and I would take them and try and apply them. So this is what I have here at the top of the page. Like I would just learn these, and maybe regardless of whether you get asked about primary, secondary or tertiary, use these ones and maybe tag on another 1 or 2. Not a question that I like, but certainly you'll see here the first thing. So last year they were accepting climate change. So when climate change, they were talking about, for the primary sector, there's a focus on reducing emissions. So farming being kind of the obvious thing, but like you could apply that to any sector. It would work throughout primary, secondary, tertiary. And then the other point that they had as a separate point was about the environment. And really that point was about the trend is there's a focus on reducing waste. Again, I think that you could use them for all the sectors. And I would certainly in this style of question be leaning very heavily on sustainability, very heavily. So climate change, reduce emissions, environment, reduce waste. So yeah, reduce carbon emissions. They're the types of things I'd be leaning on as maybe 1 or 2 points, right? The other thing that was in there for last year was changes in patterns of demand from consumers. So for the primary sector, the way that was kind of related was it was like, oh, there's now an increase in demand for vegan products. But you could apply that to any of the sectors that consumers now expect more transparency, or they're becoming more environmentally or sustainably or ethically minded in when making their decisions. So that would be another point that I'd go for, and just apply it to the particular industry. So consumers expect, business to behave more ethically. They expect transparency. They expect them to behave in a sustainable manner. And I'd be just trying to apply that to whatever industry of the three that you're asked about, right? Another one last year for the primary sector was about increases in energy costs. I'd definitely be using that for any of the sectors, mentioning an increase in costs, an increase in wages due to labour shortages, an increase in energy costs, an increase in the cost of raw materials. You could probably apply that to any of the three sectors as well. So I'd be giving that as a point. So probably 2 points here: climate change, the environment. Amazingly, they're two separate points. Changing patterns of consumer demand, throw that one in. Increases in costs of any description. So like in the services sector, you increase in wages, increase in energy costs. Look, you apply it to any of them. And then also you could go for digital transformation and how AI and automation, they're also impacting the three sectors. So there are things that I go for that are kind of generic, right? But not a question that I'm mad on. But yeah, if it suits some people, and I just suggest over answering it. Ownership structures, just look, I suppose a little tip, really good thing if you're ever talking about ownership structures, like just as if ever you're mentioning the advantage or disadvantage of an ownership structure, like just think, is there limited liability or not? So when you're talking about sole trader, disadvantage, unlimited liability. You're talking about partnership, disadvantage, unlimited liability. You're talking about any of these guys, advantage, limited liability. So limited liability is always an advantage. That's a good thing to have in your head, because you can always drop it in when you're explaining any of these things. Just you'll see DAX there, like DAX, like they're, I've been asked once in the Leaving Cert a few years ago, you were given the option to evaluate a private limited company or a DAC as an ownership structure. So it did give you the option to swerve it. Maybe that means, look, we're just introducing it here, but be prepared for a question on it down the line. Like a designated activity company is just a private limited company. It is just a different type of private limited company where they can only participate in one particular area of activity. The reason, like most financial services companies in Ireland are DAX, because they have to be by law. They can only operate in one area of business. This is worth knowing about, and it's up in the prediction videos. Privatisation, because it's topical, so the government own a stake in AIB, and they are selling that stake back to the market, so to private investors. So certainly knowing sort of the benefits and drawbacks of privatisation, probably worthwhile, could creep up. Franchise, so look at this is what I was saying earlier, this is the thing to be careful of. So this is franchise. A new business choosing to be a franchise for their new venture is a franchisee. They're like an employee. They work for the franchisor as like an employer. So just make sure you don't mix those things up. Okay, moving on. This is the biggest topic from Unit 6. It comes up, the stuff from this topic crops up somewhere in the paper every single year. So we're talking about economic variables here. So lots of this is still topical. So I have them up in the prediction video. So knowing the impact of a decrease in interest rates on business is really important. I would still be well prepared for something on inflation. So the impact of inflation on businesses, the impact of full employment worth knowing about. And then we haven't seen anything in exchange rates in ages. I mentioned that. See this, I should have said this earlier when we were looking at tax. This is really good knowledge, guys. Knowing what a direct tax is and indirect tax is really, really useful knowledge. Same thing about knowing what a progressive tax and a regressive tax is. Because like some tax questions, you end up having to explain the tax. And like you might be explaining VAT and you're like, oh, this is a tax on goods and services, but I need to tag on another point here. So if you know that it's an indirect tax, you can drop that in. If you know it's a regressive tax, you can drop that in. So they're good things. I'd always, in explaining any tax, say whether it's direct, indirect, progressive, regressive. So really good knowledge to have in explaining taxes. So a bit of a link to Unit 4 there, but yeah, it's definitely worthwhile knowing about, so that's a good tip. Just one thing here then with community development. So community development did crop up last year. If you're asked about the benefits of community development, always give one of each. So always give at least one economic and one social. even if it doesn't stipulate that in the question. So give one of at least one of each. So if you see a question that says like just outline the benefits of community development, make sure that you've got at least one social one in there. The social ones, I know they read waffly, but just make sure you have at least one in there. Even if the question doesn't say economic and social, make sure you've got one social. Just a little tip there. This is one of my favorite things. It's ridiculous, really. Like if you're looking at the benefits of community development here, we're saying, the benefit is it creates jobs, and spin-off effects are more jobs. So here we have 2 points. It creates jobs and more jobs. So just remember them and get them down as your first 2 points there. A couple of things to point out to you about the state agencies, right? If we just jump down here to Enterprise Ireland, it is a compulsory point on the Leaving Cert that if you're explaining what Enterprise Ireland do, you have to have that first one. So it's about providing help to Indigenous Irish businesses with an export focus. So that bit is compulsory. You have to give that point on the market scheme if you're explaining Enterprise Ireland. So that's really important. And then the same thing with the IDA. This is a compulsory point in the market scheme. You have to give it. So you have to say they're responsible for attracting FDI and developing FDI. So they are compulsory points. You have to give them. The same way that if you're talking about, by the way, I should have said this earlier, if you're talking about sale of goods and the question is about a good, saying that the good has to be of merchantable quality, that's a compulsory point. So there's 3 things there that if you leave them out, you're leaving a lot of marks on the table, right? Ethical, social and environmental responsibility. So the kind of ethical bit of this came up last year. So I'd certainly be, if I'm looking at this, be looking at the characteristics of a environmentally conscious business. And yeah, looking at the impact of being environmentally conscious. Besides that, not really a whole lot to say on that. The ethics stuff, yeah, did crop up last year. So that's Unit 6. Any questions in Unit 6 there? So Unit 7 then, if you want to open up this one, and we'll finish with this pretty quickly because I've bored you all enough. Does the business market scheme change like the maths point scheme where if one part of the question is answered badly in general, the other part of the question? Yeah, is the answer to that. They will adjust it. They will adjust it. They will adjust it, yeah. So like, let's say originally, like maybe when they're designing the question, they had like, this will be, something will be like 5 marks and 5 marks. Or let's say it's 3 points and it's like, they'll all be worth 5 marks. They might change that like the last point is maybe worth 4 marks, the other ones are worth more, something like that, whatever it is. But yeah, they do adjust it if students are struggling to come up with the points. Okay, let's look at Unit 7. So international trade. Loads of you are asking me about Unit 7 short questions. I'm not going to cover it. What are the most common short questions in Unit 7? Questions on the balance of payments, balance of trade, the calculations there. They're some of the most common short questions on the, not just from Unit 7, on the entire course. So this is really, really important stuff. And then the other part of this, protectionism and barriers to trade, again, a really, really common short question. So I just point you to a couple of things here. Those short questions, they'll often ask for these definitions. So these are important ones. You'll either have to give these ones here, really important, or you'll have to give this or this. Now, what you don't realize is that as a point of information, you can just say this stuff. That with, let's say the balance of payments here, if total exports are greater than total imports, there's a surplus. That's really easy marks that you can pick up there. You can give the reverse. If exports are less than imports, it's a deficit. Now, obviously, you have to focus up here on explaining what it is. So it's the difference between total exports and total imports. But in terms of a second bit of information that you're tagging on there, this is really good stuff to add, guys. So really useful. Okay. Other thing I wanted to point out there hasn't come to me. And calculations, is that there? Probably further down. Just now, so there's 2 ways that you can calculate the balance of payments, and you need both ways. So let's say you want to totally cover yourself for the Unit 7 short questions. I'm saying that this is one of the most common ones. So balance of payments can be calculated 2 ways. You can do it this way, where you get your total exports and take away your total imports, or you can find your balance of trade. So visible exports minus visible imports, and then get your visible exports minus your visible imports and find the difference, right? You need both ways. You need both ways. But again, if you go into the prediction videos, it's in there. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Certainly protectionism worth knowing about it just in the context of like, I know Trump imposed tariffs a bit later than maybe when the exam has been designed, but it was still widely reported on, so it's kind of a topical thing. And like I say, it's one of the most common short questions as it is. So the EU came up last year, and it was the horrible bit of the EU. It was about the policies. So I'd certainly be different directive and regulation, been able to explain those two, and then knowing about the EU institutions and decision-making process of the EU. They're really common short questions as well. So this stuff is really, really important. There is kind of a hierarchy to the EU institutions. Like the Commission are kind of the bottom feeders, while the Council are kind of the top dogs, right? But anyway, more on that in the videos. But it is really, really common short question to be asked about decision-making process. And I think having 2 points of information well prepared on directive and regulation looks overdue. EU policies be taken, like if you're learning Unit 7, like this is horrible. I know it's hardly hard for a lot of us to be learning 2 of them and take my chances with them. Looking at global business, it's the global marketing part of this that I think looks due to be asked. So really this is about a lot of students lose marks here. Like if you're asked about the challenges of marketing globally, or how does a business need to adjust their marketing mix, you will get marks for stating the 4 Ps, but putting global in front of them. And then really what you're saying is just how does original marketing mix needs to be adjusted if you're going to sell internationally. So the product has to be adjusted because there might be technical legal language requirements. So like some cars have to be adjusted because the country demands so that it be right-hand drive or left-hand drive, whatever it is. So you're just picking these and explaining how they need to be adjusted to trade internationally. But again, it's up there on the predicted questions videos. That would be the bit though from that topic. And nothing else really on Unit 7 to say there. But yeah, if you're covering the short questions, EU decision making and balanced trade, balanced payments, protectionism, they're the really, really common ones. Any questions before we finish up? Do you want me, I have a few minutes here. You have to let me know though. Whoever's out there, you have to let me know. I have a few minutes to talk kind of exam timing and night before if you want, but let me know if you don't. And you, like I say, I did do it in the last grind week. So if you're like, no, I've had enough business for today, I'm going to move on and get on with some other study, that's grand. But if anybody wants me to do it, I'll spend 5 minutes doing it, but just let me know in the chat there. Or if you have any other questions, fire them in, now's your chance. Deadly, good to hear it, Jake. Delighted you got something out of it. So Amy, I didn't kind of just go predictions really. Like if you want to know what I think is most likely to be asked from Unit 5, if you go onto the business page, you'll see I've got like unit by unit what I think are the most likely, or certainly the absolute must knows for the unit. So like what I was doing there was, as I was going through each unit, I was just kind of like, oh, be careful of this. You need to include that in your answer. Here's a little tip to help you remember. It wasn't so much about predictions. So like I probably spent a while in Unit 5. So it will take me too long to go back over it. The class will be recorded if you want to watch it though. So you can go back and watch it. Some other stuff there. Ollie, you missed it as well. Like I say, it will be back up to, like the class will be recorded and you'll be able to watch it. So you can go back and rewatch it because it'll take me too long to go back through it. And like I say, it wasn't really predictions as such. It was more like, look out for this. This is a trap. You need to give 2 points here. If they ask about market research techniques, that's field and desk, not the individual forms of each, that type of thing. Can you talk about the exam timing and night before? Niall, thank you. I will if you want me to. Yeah, no problem. You're welcome, Ava. Leaving out 6 and 7 too risky. Lucy, like it's totally possible to do very well with that, but you just have to be all over the other 5, and in particular it puts you under a lot of pressure for Unit 1 because you're kind of forced there. You're really forced because that first part of the long questions, you get 4 questions and it looks like 2 on Unit 1, 1 on 6 and 1 on 7. So you're not going to be able to do the 6 and 7 ones, so you have to be choosing at least 1 if not 2 of those Unit 1 questions. So it is possible to do well, but it's really putting you're under a lot of pressure with unit one. That's what I'd say there. And also, you need to cover yourself well for the short questions from 6 and 7 because you will be light there. Because, like, if you think about it, right, they're going to use in recent years what's happened because the extra long question has been on unit one. They haven't actually gone for many short questions in unit one. Actually, if you go back to the last 3 papers, including the fair papers, like that's 36 short questions, and only 2 of those have been in unit one. So they're not asking many short questions about unit one. They're going to use 2, 3, and 4 for the ABQ, and they're going to use some of that for long questions. So it leaves a little bit less content there for short questions, which means that it seems quite likely to me that we'll stack the short questions with stuff from 6 and 7. In fact, actually last year, I think maybe 4 of the questions out of 12, which is a lot, were from 6 and 7. So that's the other place where your strategy falls down. So it is possible, but you should still be good on those short questions. Sorry, Lucy. It should still be, you need to be all over your short questions in those 2 units, and you need to be very tight in unit 1 for that strategy to work. Exam timing, I'll spend a bit of time on that because you asked me for it. If I can find it. Here. Okay, great. So this is in the Easter notes. This stuff, just if you're looking for it. Niall, yeah. So it's in the Easter notes. So you'll find it there. So look, one thing to be mindful of is when business is, right? Business is always on sorry, it's on Thursday. Business is always on the Thursday that second week, right? So if you think about it, you've had first week a couple of big exams, then you've got that weekend, and that weekend, the Monday, then you're heading into like what, Irish and maths, paper 2. And then like if you've got some big hitting subjects then after that. So like you've got like biology, French, history on kind of the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and then business is on the Thursday. So like what's the likelihood that you look at business the weekend before? It's pretty unlikely because you got maths and Irish on Monday. Like you got maybe biology, popular subjects. You got French, history maybe. So you got a lot that's happening before business. Are you going to look at it the previous week? Well, if you do, it'll be at the start of the previous week, maybe Monday. So like my point is, it's going to be a long time maybe that you're not used to at this point because you're kind of maybe getting to everything a lot. It's going to be a while before you last see business to the night before. So I would always say like that might sit comfortably with some of you, but just make a plan in your head like, okay, I'm happy for this particular occasion to be the last time that I close my business book until the night before the exam, and just have that in your head. Okay, I know that's going to be the last time. I'm going to make my peace with it, and that's my strategy. So like I always think, if you can get an hour in that weekend before the maths and Irish, good. But just look, it's a long run in, and like it's a tough week. So when is just I guess the thing I'm saying here is, when is the last time you're going to look at business, have a plan for that, and make your peace with it, and that's it, right? I'll come to the night before or after, right? Because that's in the study plan. Just in terms of, you get your paper, you go in there, and what I would do is, in terms of timing, I would spend between reading the paper and doing my short questions, I'd take half an hour for that stuff. So read the paper and do all the short questions, I'd take half an hour. So at 9:30 to 10 o'clock, I'm reading through the whole paper and doing my short questions. Now, when I'm doing my short questions, what I'm doing is I'm going to start by circling the ones I like the look of. So you've got to do 8 out of 12. So hopefully there's a few that you love. You're like, I know them. And you do 8 out of 12 and start with the ones you like the look of. Then I would do any ones involving calculations, and then you do the rest. So the reason I do any ones involving calculations next is because they're the ones that you get into a bit of a rabbit hole. You're like, oh, that break-even answer doesn't look right. That ratio looks off. I'm going to have to recalculate it, that take home pay, whatever it is, and then you need to redo it. So start with the ones you like the look of to get your confidence up, because like it's obviously just good to start off on a positive note. Answers will flow to you that little bit easier when you're confident. We've all been in situations, I think, where you're in an exam and you just get into a bit of a rut and you're like, I know this, but like it's just not flowing. So if you start off well, hopefully things flow and you continue on that vein, right? So start with the ones you like the look of, then do any short questions with calculations, and then do the rest. If you can't do 1 or 2, grand. If you can do 10 or 12, brilliant, knock yourself out. Just now, I suppose, with the short questions, things to be careful with: explaining any term, 2 sentences of keyword information. So like if you're asked to distinguish between 2 words, fair dismissal and constructive dismissal, it's basically going to give you 7 lines in the box where you're going to have to say 2 things about each of them. So you need to get to the point and include your key terms quickly. So just be careful of that. Don't under-answer it, right? That's what a lot of students do with their short questions, with definitions and explanations. And also at the start there, when you're planning your short questions, you're reading through the long questions. So with the long questions, yeah, you're picking the 4 out of 8 that you like the look of the most, the ones I think I'll get the most marks on them. But you should also be looking out for illustrate and evaluate during that first reading of paper, because they're the 2 verbs that demand something specific of you. So illustrate, you'll always have to give an example. Evaluate, at the end of each point you make, you'll have to say, in my opinion, this is good or bad because, right? So that's taking you half an hour, read the paper and doing the short questions. Then at 10 o'clock, you're doing the applied business question. I would do this second. Like a big mistake with the applied business question is people spend too much time on it and they give it more weight than it deserves. Like, yes, you should give it respect it deserves, but don't give it any more than that. ABQ is worth 20%. Your short questions are worth 20%. So like they're worth the same. So with the ABQ, I'd do it second. And the reason, and look, I see people taking all sorts of different approaches to the ABQ. Like someone said to me recently, I'll do it last because if I do it last, I can't spend too much time on it. And I was like, whatever works for you, but like that's just be more disciplined about it, because if you think about it, doing it second, right, makes sense to me because 1, short questions have the highest average mark nationally. So people are doing quite well in short questions, like the majority of people. So you do quite well in short questions, your confidence is up. And so that seems like a good time to be heading into the ABQ. And then the second reason I'd say do it second is because it's the thing that takes longest to do on the whole paper. Like I just said, reading the paper and doing a short question takes half an hour. Each long question is going to take 25 minutes each, but the ABQ is going to take you 40 minutes. So it's the thing that takes longest. So it's a good idea to do that when you're 1, fresh and 2, confident. So that's why I do it second. I take the paper in the order it comes. So yeah, I'm not going to, like with the ABQ, if you want to know how to tackle it, there's a row of videos under business. ABQ, look at the first one and I go into like plan your answer, plan a market scheme, all that sort of stuff, answer layout. And then 25 minutes each per long question. That will leave you some time for reflecting on life at the end. You won't have time to do like more long questions than that. You will have time to do more short questions, maybe than the 8, but you won't have time to do more long questions. Any questions on any of that? Okay, just on the night before, just you have some night before advice. Sorry, what I did there on the news feed, you see that 4-week study plan. I clicked on that, opened this up, and you'll see at the bottom there you have just some night before advice. So I would revisit the exam layout and timing, so make sure you're familiar with the structure of the paper. So you're doing 8 out of 12 shorts, you're doing your ABQ, and then you've got your 4 questions in part A. So question 1 will be on unit 1, question 2 will be on unit 6, question 3 unit 7, question 4 hopefully on unit 1. Then you're into part B, question 5 in unit 2/3, question 6 and 7, mixture of 4 and 5, and then question 8 probably in unit 5 or some mix. So you're familiar with that structure. Run through the timings again. What I would do is I would scan through those keyword grids. So the ones that we've just kind of done there, I'd be going through them. I'm kind of doing a high level revision, just going through my keywords, any list of definitions you have, going through that, reviewing key definitions, that sort of stuff. So scanning my keyword grids, plugging any last gaps in my knowledge, looking at any summaries that you have, both in terms of your keywords, your headings, and your definitions. I would practice some short questions because that's a really good way to do a little bit of revision of everything. Like you can kind of get across the 7 units there by doing some short questions. So good short questions to practice are probably the ones from 2, 3, 4 years ago, the ones that are most likely to be coming back to the cycle, right? So you could do a couple of them. What was the thing I said earlier? Can't remember. There was something I'm missing there, but anyway. And then I would always say finish. Like I think when you sit down to study, like all you can ask yourself of yourself when you like, time is such a precious resource for you. So like when you invest your time into something, you want to be able to come away from it going, I got something out of that. I used that time well. And if you're 1% better, you've used your time well. So like if you can go to bed that night thinking, even if you know everything, you think, well, I'm 1% better. So just finish on that one thing that is going to make you better. And you can go to bed thinking, well, like that was positive time. I am now in a better place for this exam than I was. I'm positive about it. You wake up knowing that I am in a positive place for this. So just finish with that one positive thing that's improving you, always pushing yourself. And I just think that that's good use of your time, because what can happen there the night before is you're trying to do too much. Just focus on making progress and positivity, even up to the last minute. And you put your books away, go to bed on that positive note, knowing that you're in a better place than you were a few hours ago. Any questions on that?